Hollow Knight, Hollow Knight, Hollow Knight. Arguably one of the very best, if not the best indie game to have ever come out. And on top of that, with Team Cherry's next upcoming game, Silksong, please, I must play. I figured I should give a healthy explanation as to why you should play Hollow Knight if you haven't or if you have stopped. Now, I will say that this video does contain spoilers as well as my personal opinions, but I feel like I can give some pretty good reasons as someone who got 112% completion, gotten all the achievements, and did every boss on Radiant mode. If you want the short and sweet of it, Hollow Knight is an outstanding game with simplistic gameplay, an immersive soundtrack, and a beautiful 2D art style. But for those who are sticking around for the full video, I am now going to discuss around 7 short reasons as to why Hollow Knight is a worthwhile game to play. Hollow Knight excels in combat, mainly because it keeps the player's options simple. You can really only swing your sword in 4 directions, and you can only cast 3 damaging spells. Combine that with a dash and a double jump, and you get a pretty simple form of combat that the player can use. In my mind, less is more in this case, and limiting what options the player has in terms of combat gives an ease of simplicity and doesn't cause too much confusion when deciding what to attack with. Additionally, even though a player can equip charms and get health or sword upgrades, this is only more so an add-on and will never drastically change the player's form of combat. A few examples of this are that a player can change their charms to favor their sword's damage, their spell's damage, or even their healing. Another thing that it bolsters is a large variety of bosses for the player to fight. These bosses can range from simple to very challenging, which gives an increased feeling of difficulty as the player progresses throughout the game. In relation to that, the bosses are fairly spread out through the whole world of Hollow Nest, so the game is able to fill those separate spaces of downtime with well-crafted areas of platforming and rewards. And even though bosses can be very frustrating, you will more often than not get a satisfying feeling when you learn the boss's attack pattern and are able to evade all of their attacks. Most of the time they will punish a player who just wants to rush through and not take the time to read their attack cues that the boss might give before each certain attack. And overall, I think it's a good thing because if bosses didn't offer a challenge, then the reward you would get for defeating them wouldn't feel as special or valuable. One more thing that it offers is the option for the player to choose how many extra bosses they want to fight in their playthrough. In total, Hollow Knight has around 44 bosses, but on a simple playthrough, you might only fight around 13 of those bosses. Atmospheric would be the best word I could use to describe the overall feel of Hollow Knight. It's a game where the artwork and music fit together seamlessly and nothing feels out of place. I strongly recommend playing the game with either headphones or having a soundbar in your room, because the soundtrack perfectly pulls you into whatever part of the map you're in. Whether that's the absent feeling in the Forgotten Crossroads, or the somber rain in the City of Tears. Think of it like a giant puzzle where each area represents a critical piece, and if one piece was missing, it would take away just how grand and well put together the world of Hollow Nest is. Another thing to take note of is how it feels like the player's camera is close. And so even though the areas don't have an instant massive feel, they can get this feeling through exploration while also getting an appreciation for my next reason, the smaller details. A good amount of games try to impress the player with big action scenes or large in-your-face areas, which are fine, but they also tend to skip out on the smaller details that make the game feel truly complete. Within Hollow Knight, there are a plethora of tiny interactions that I'd say could fit into 2 categories, direct or background details. What separates these is that usually direct come from an enemy or boss, while background serve as things you can find or keep a lookout for. Some of my favorite examples of direct include the Moss Knight looking out at the Lake of Un, the seer turning into a little moth when they ascend, how during the City of Tears cutscene, they specifically have it looking like the Hollow Knight's statue is crying, and the broken vessel reaching towards the player when it's defeated, it being the closest thing to a sibling that the knight faces. And all of these just add so much more depth to the interactions, because they all just go a little extra when trying to give depth to a character. Then on the side of background details, some examples include the giant corpses found in Greenpath and in Kingdom's Edge, the abyss creatures seen in the Lifeblood room, or even in the background ambience of Queen's Station, where you can hear the stag bells ringing or the faint crowded sounds of past voices. And overall, the game didn't have to add these small details and interactions, but by including them in it, it makes the game feel so much more alive when you're playing. This next point is pretty similar to small details, but I thought it deserved its own point, being the depth of NPC interactions that the player has. While most interactions are pretty basic, some allow you to gain a better understanding of the characters. My first and favorite example of this would be Quirrell, where as you progress through the game, you get to encounter and hear of him, where he usually just talks about the area that you're in. But it's at the end of his journey where you get to understand the depth of the life that this character has lived. This becomes especially apparent with his Dreamnail dialogue. To live in age, yet remember so little, perhaps I should be thankful. All tragedy erased, I see only wonders. And in this last interaction, you get a moment of reflection with Quirrell to think about the vast kingdom of hollowness that you have just explored. Another example would be the Nailmasters Oro, Mato, and Shio. The game could have easily given them all the same dialogue and purpose, give you a nail art and be on your way, but Hollow Knight takes that extra step by giving each of them a varying personality and dialogue that relates to each other. Then a more forgettable one, being the Lost Prophet, gives you a representation of your story progression. At the start when you encounter him, he talks about taking in the infection and embracing the light, yet when you come back to him later after further game progression, you get to see how he gets completely overtaken by the infection and loses his life because of it. By the time you finish most games, even if you're a completionist, you may only need one game file, but Hollow Knight says,
"Not this time,"
and gives you so much to do. So let's say you're playing and you want to get all the charms and mash shards. Well, some are found at shops, but the majority are found through exploration and doing specific quests. And between both of those, you will be searching for 40 charms and 16 shards throughout the entire Hollow Nest. Next, let's say you're super into the story of the game and you love learning the lore. Well, you're given the option to take your time speaking with all the NPCs and reading all the bits of lore scattered throughout the game. Or you could also watch an hour and 17-minute lore video done by a dedicated fan. Now to shorten it down a fair bit, you've got the choice of 5 different endings, different achievements based on your choices, the option to play the game on Steel Soul, which is essentially one life mode, the option to speedrun the game to get achievements, a challenging platforming section known as the Path of Pain, around 44 different bosses to fight between the game and the late game boss rush mode, and between all of that you've got around 60 plus hours of gameplay, that being on the low end. So yeah, there's a vast amount of content, and the nice part about all that is it doesn't require you to get that much to beat the standard game. Typically most people only need around 44% out of the grand 112 to even complete the game. This final grouping of why you should play Hollow Knight is more so a collection of much smaller thoughts that don't really have to be elaborated upon as much. To start it off, this game typically costs $15 instead of the soulless $60 AAA games that flood the market. And to top it off, it goes on sale for 50% off pretty frequently. It looks amazing and stands out compared to the sea of 3D hyper-realistic and 2D pixel art games. Honestly, for me, it's quite refreshing and gives a nice change of pace compared to everything else. Then add that it's got a dedicated and funny fanbase, the dedicated side getting their clown makeup on for every single Nintendo Direct or Xbox showcase, even though we all know there isn't going to be a shred of new info shared. On the other hand, you have the funny side, which will always have new and stump players' questions answered with "get good." Additionally, two examples that I think of with how much the game is loved is that people have modded multiplayer into this single-player game, as well as made videos on cutting and ranking every single piece of grass in the game. Lastly for me, a college friend of mine told me to get the game freshman year. Between that and my sophomore year, I only played it a handful of times. Then, my summer before junior year, I was hit with a full Hollow Knight infection, and since then I have played the game regularly 3 times, done around 3 Steel Soul files, and have watched 2 of my friends play through the game, gotten 112%, all achievements, completed Path of Pain, and more so recently, beat every single boss on their hitless mode. Since I've started playing this game, it has absolutely hooked me, and I cannot recommend the game enough. I would say to play it soon before Silksong comes out, but you probably got plenty of time before that.
Già la cara, sa non c'era, c'era il